open a bottle of bubbly. Yeah. Here's to another goddamn new year. And outside, 2 million drunk Bostonians are getting ready to sing Auld Lang Syne out of tune. I sit there in my easy chair, looking at the clouds, orange with celebration. I wonder if you're out there. Hey! The ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night. I slip on it every time. Open the third bottle of bubbly. Yeah, and I take that bottle of champagne, go into the kitchen, stand in front of the kitchen window, and I take all my clothes off, take that bottle of champagne, and I pour it on my head, feel a cascade through my hair and across my chest, and the phone rings. And it's my mother. And she says, "Hi, honey, how's Boston?" And I stand there all alone on New Year's Eve, buck naked, drenched in champagne, looking at a bunch of strangers, looking at them, looking at me, looking at them, and I say, "Oh, fine, Mom. How's Washington? Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time. Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time, yeah." So I guess the party line is I followed you up here. Well, I don't know about that. Mainly because knowing about that would involve knowing about some pathetic, ridiculous, and absolutely true things about myself. I'd rather not admit to right now. I woke up at 3 a.m. with the radio on, that Gladys Knight and the Pip song on, about how she'd rather live in his world with him than live in her own world alone. And I laid there, head spinning, trying to fall asleep, and I thought to myself, "Oh, Gladys, girl, I love you, but oh, get a life! Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time. Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time. Time, time, time. Time, time, time. Time, time, time. Time, time, time.
Those with saddle noses, those with atrophic limbs, and yes, chemists and pure math majors also, those with atrophic necks. Scleroderma adultorum, them that seep, the serodermatodic. Come on, the circular says. The hydrocephalic, the tabescent, and cachetic and anorexic, the Bragg's diseased, in their heavy red rins of flesh. The dermally wine-stained or carbuncular or steatocryptotic or, God forbid, all three. Marine Amat syndrome, you say? Come on down. The psoriatic, the eczematically shunned, and the scrofulodermic, bell-shaped steatopeiagics in your special slacks, afflictees of pityriasis rosea. It says here, come ye all, hateful, blessed are the poor in body, for they. The pulsing aircraft alert light of the aerial is magenta, a sharp and much closer star now, with his fingers laced behind his head, reclined and gazing upward, listening. The centrifugal whirl speed making its tips light trail color across the eyes. The light's oval, a bloody halo over the very barest of all possible heads. Madame Psychosis has done UHID stuff before, once or twice. He is listening to her read 4 levels below the oblongated recess that becomes the heating shaft's nubbin of spine. Ad lib style reading from one of the PR circulars of the Union of the Hideously and Improbably Deformed. An agnostic style 12-step support group deal for what it calls the aesthetically challenged. She sometimes reads circulars and catalogs and PR type things, though not regularly. Some things take several successive shows to get through. Ratings stay solid, listeners hang in. The engineer is pretty sure he'd hang in even if he weren't paid to. He does like to settle into a sulcus and smoke slowly and exhale up past the blurred red ellipse of the aerial monitoring. Madame's themes are at once unpredictable and somehow rhythmic, more like probability waves for subhadronics than anything else. The student engineer has never once seen Madame Psychosis enter or leave WYYY. She probably takes the elevator. It's 22nd October in the ONANite year of the Depend adult undergarment. Like most marriages, Avril and the late James Incandenzas was an evolved product of concordance and compromise, and the scholastic curriculum at ETA is the product of negotiated compromises between Avril's academic hard assery and James's and Stitt's keen sense of athletic pragmatics. It is because of Avril, who quit MIT entirely and went down to halftime at Brandeis, and even turned down an extremely plumby type stipend and fellowship at Radcliffe's Bunting Institute at first year to design and assume the helm of ETA's curriculum. That the Enfield Tennis Academy is the only athletic focused type school in North America that still adheres to the trivium and quadrivium of the hard ass classical LAS tradition, and thus one of the very few extant sports academies that makes a real stab at being a genuine pre college school and not just an iron curtainish jock factory. But she did never let Incandenza forget what the place was supposed to be about, and so Afril's flinty Mezana pedagogy wasn't diluted so much as ad valoramized, pragmatically focused toward the corporeal POTUS type goals kids were coming up the hill to give their childhoods for. Some ETA twists Avril allowed into the classic LAS path are, for example, that the 7 subjects of the T and Q are mixed and not divided into quadrivial upper class versus trivial ephebic. That ETA geometry classes pretty much ignore the study of closed figures, excepting rectangles, to concentrate also, except for Thorpe's trigonometry of cubes, which is elective and mostly aesthetic, for 2 increasingly brutal semesters on the involution and expansion of bare angles. That the quadrivial requirement of astronomy has at ETA become a 2 term elementary optics survey, since vision issues are obviously more germane to the game, and since all the hardware required for everything from athodic to apochromatic lens work were and are right there in the lab of the Commonwealth Administration Tunnel. Music's been pretty much bagged. Plus, the trivium moid fetish for classical oratory has by now at ETA been converted to a wide range of history and studio courses in various types of entertainment, mostly recorded film. Again, way too much of Incandenza's lavish equipment lying around not to exploit. plus the legally willed and endowed for perpetuity presence on the academic payroll of Mrs. Prickett, Mrs. Mr. Ogilvy, Mr. Disney R. Leith, and Miss Soma Richardson Levy O'Brien Chavoff, the late founder director's loyal sound engineer, best boy, production assistant, and third favorite actress, respectively. Plus, also the six-term entertainment requirement because students hoping to prepare for careers as professional athletes are by intention training also to be entertainers, albeit of a deep and special sort, was in Condensa's line. One of the few philosophical points he had to pretty much ram down the throats of both Avril and Stitt, who was pushing hard for some mix of theology and the very grim ethics of Kant. Mario Incandenza has sat in on a back row stool for every session of an ETA entertainment department offering ever since he was finally 3 years ago, December, asked to disenroll from the Winter Hill Special School in Cambridgeport for cheerfully declining even to try to learn to really read, explaining he'd way rather listen and watch. And he is a fanatical listener, observer. He treats the lavish Tatsuoka Fringe FM band tuner in the living room of the headmaster's house like kids of three generations past, listening the way other kids watch TP, opting for mono and sitting right up close to one of the speakers, with his head cocked dog like, listening, staring into that special pocket of near middle distance reserved for the serious listener. He really does have to sit right up close to listen to 60 minutes plus minus when he's over at HMH with CT and sometimes Hal at his mother's late suppers, because Avril has some auditory thing about broadcast sound. It gets the howling fan toads from any voice that does not exit a living corporal head. And though Avril's made it clear that Mario's free at any time to activate and align the Tatsuko's ghostly green tuner to whatever he wishes, he keeps the volume so low that he has to be lowered onto a low coffee table and lean in and almost put his ear up against the woofer's tremble and concentrate closely to hear YYY signal over the conversation in the dining room, which tends to get sort of maniacally high pitched toward the end of supper. Avril never actually asks Mario to keep it down. He does it out of unspoken consideration for her thing about sound. Another of her unspoken but stressful things involves issues of enclosure, and the HMH has no interior doors between rooms, and not even much in the way of walls. And the living and dining rooms are separated only by a vast, multi leveled tangle of houseplants in pots and on little stools of different heights, and arrayed under hanging UV lamps of an intensity that tends to give the diners strange little patterns of tan that differ according to where someone usually sits at the table. Hal sometimes complains privately to Mario that he gets more than enough UV during the day, thank you very much. The plants are incredibly lush and hale and sometimes threaten to block off the whole easement from dining to living room. And the rope handled Brazilian machete CT had mounted on the wall by the tremulous china case has stopped really being a joke. The moms calls the house plants her green babies, and she has rather spectacular thumb plant wise for a Canadian. The leucodermatic, the xanthodantic, the maxillofacially swollen, those with distorted orbits of all kinds. Get out from under the sun's cold lighting is what this says. Come in from the spectral rain. Madame Psychosis' broadcast accent is not Boston. There are R's for one thing, and there is no cultured Cambridge stutter. It's the accent of someone who spent time either losing a southern lilt or cultivating one. It's not flat and twangy like Stice's, and it's not a drawl like the people at Gainesville's Academy. Her voice itself is sparely modulated and strangely empty, as if she were speaking from inside a small box. It's not bored or laconic or ironic or tongue in cheek. The basilisk breathed and pueric. It's reflective but not judgmental somehow. Her voice seems low depth familiar to Mario the way certain childhood smells will strike you as familiar and oddly sad. All ye Pyrrhonic or Teratodial, the phrenologically malformed, the suppuratively lesioned, the endocrinologically malodorous or whatever ilk. Run, don't walk on down. The acervulous nosed, the radically ectomide, the morbidly diaphoretic with a hanky in every pocket, the chronically granulomatous, the ones, it says here, the ones the cruel call two baggers, one bag for your head, one bag for the observer's head, in case your bag falls off. The hated and dateless and shunned who keep to the shadows, those who undress only in front of their pets. The quote, aesthetically challenged, leave your lazarettes and oubliettes. I'm reading this right here, your closets and cellars and the TP tableau. Find nurturing and support and the inner resources to face your own unblinking sight, is what this goes on to say, a bit overheatedly, maybe. Is it our place to say? It says here hugs, not Uggs. It says, come undone, the veil of the type and token. Come learn to love what's hidden inside, to hold and cherish the almost unbelievably thick ankled, the kyphotic and lordotic, the irredeemably cellulitic. It says progress, not perfection. It says never perfection. The fatally pulchritudinous welcome, the antagonizing, side by side with the medusoid, the papule, the macular, the albanic, Medusas and odalisks both come find common ground. All meeting rooms windowless. That's in italics. All meeting rooms windowless. Plus, the music she's cued for this inflectionless reading is weirdly compelling. You can never predict what it will be, but over time, some kind of pattern emerges, a trend or rhythm. Tonight's background fits somehow as she reads. There's not any real forwardness to it. You don't sense it straining to get anywhere. The thing it makes you see as she reads is something heavy swinging slowly at the end of a long rope. It's minor key enough to be eerie against the empty lilt of the voice and the clinks of tines and china as Mario's relations eat turkey salad and steamed cheese and drink lager and milk and vin blanc from Hull over behind the plants bathed in purple light. Mario can see the back of the mom's head high above the table, and then over to the left, Hal's bigger right arm, and then Hal's profile when he lowers it to eat. There's a ball by his plate. The ETA players seem to need to eat 6 or 7 times a day. Hal and Mario had walked over for 2100 supper at HMH after Hal had read something for Mr. Leaf's class and then disappeared for about half an hour while Mario stood supported by his police lock and waited for him. Mario rubs his nose with the heel of his hand. Madame Psychosis has an unironic but generally gloomy outlook on the universe in general. One of the reasons Mario is obsessed with her show is that he's somehow sure Madame Psychosis cannot herself sense the compelling beauty and light she projects over the air somehow. He has visions of interfacing with her and telling her she'd feel a lot better if she listened to her own show, he bets. Madame Psychosis is one of only two people Mario would love to talk to, but would be scared to try. The word periodic pops into his head. Hey, Hal, he calls across the plants. Like for months in the spring semester of YDPAH, she referred to her own program as Madame's Downerlit Hour and read depressing book after depressing book. Good Morning, Midnight, and Maggie, A Girl of the Streets, and Giovanni's Room, and Under the Volcano, plus a truly ghastly Bret Ellis period during Lent. In a monotone, really slowly, night after night, Mario sits on the low little Fonda Row knockoff coffee table with bowed legs, the table, with his head cocked right up next to speaker and his claws in his lap. His toes tend to point inward when he sits. The background music is both predictable and within that predictability surprising. It's periodic. It suggests expansion without really expanding. It leads up to the exact kind of inevitability it denies. It is heavily digital, but with something of a choral bouquet, but unhumane. Mario thinks of the word haunting like in a haunting echo of thus and such. Madame Psychosis' cute music, which the student engineer never chooses or even sees her bring in, is always terribly obscure, but often just as queerly powerful and compelling as her voice and show itself. The MIT community feels it tends to give you the feeling there's an in joke that you and she alone are in on. Very few devoted WYYY listeners sleep well. Mario has horizontal breathing trouble sometimes, but other than that, he sleeps like a babe. Avril in Condensa still sticks with the old Lizette Regent practice of taking just tea and nibbles at US supper time and waiting to eat seriously until right before bed. Cultured Canadians tend to think vertical digestion makes the mind unkeen. Some of Orin and Mario and Hal's earliest memories are of nodding off at the dining room table and being gently carried by a very tall man to bed. This was in a different house. Madame Psychosis' cute music stirs very early memories of Mario's father. Avril is more than willing to take some good natured guff about her inability to eat before like 2230 hours. Prandial music holds little charm or associations for Hal, who, like most of the kids on double daily drills, makes fists around his utensils and eats like a wild dog. Nor are excluded the utterly noseless, nor the hideously wall and cross-eyed, nor either the ergodic of Saint Anthony the leprous, the ferociously formally eruptive, or even the sarcomad of Kaposi. Hell and Mario probably listen late over at the HMH twice a week. Avril likes to see them outside, the awkward formality of her position at ETA. CT's the same at home and office. Both Avril and Tava's bedrooms are on the second floor, as a matter of fact, right next to each other. The only other room up there is Avril's personal study, with a big color Xerox of M. Hamilton as Oz Westwich on the door, custom fiber wiring for a tri modem TP console. A stairway runs from her study down the backside of HMH North, down a tributary tunnel leading to the main tunnel to Commonwealth Administration, so Avril can commute over to ETA below ground. The HMA tunnel connects with the main at a point between the pump room and Commonwealth administration, meaning Avril never like hunches idly past the pump room, which fact Hal obviously endorses. Late suppers at HMH for Hal are limited by the Lin to twice a week tops because they get him excused from dawn drills, which also means late night mischief possibilities. Sometimes they bring Canada's John, no relation, Wayne over with them, whom Mrs. I likes and speaks to animatedly, even though he rarely says anything the whole time. He's there and also eats like a wild dog, sometimes neglecting utensils altogether. Avril also likes it when Axford comes. Axford has a hard time eating, and she likes to exhort him to eat. Very rarely anymore does Hal bring Pamulis or Jim Struck, to whom Avril is so faultlessly, brittly polite that the dining room's tension raises hair. Whenever Avril parts ficus leaves to check, Mario's still hunched, pigeon-toed, and cocked in the same arcee victorish posture, with the little horizontal forehead crease that means he's either listening or thinking hard. The multiple amputee, the prosthetically malmatched, the snaggle-toothed, wattled, weak-chinned, and walrus-cheeked, the palate cleft, the really large pored, the excessively, but not necessarily lycanthropically hirsute, the pin-headed, the convulsively touretic, the Parkinsonianly tremulous, the stunted and gnarled, the teratoid of overall visage, the twisted and hunged and humped and heliotic, the in any way asymmetrical, the rodential and saurian and equine looking. Hey Hal, the trinostriled, the invaginate of mouth and eye, those with those dark loose bags under their eyes that hang halfway down their faces, those with Cushing's disease, those who look like they have Down syndrome, even though they don't have Down syndrome. You decide. You be the judge. It says you are welcome regardless of severity. Severity is in the eye of the sufferer, it says. Pain is pain. Crow's feet, birthmark, rhinoplasty that didn't take, mole, overbite, and bad hair year. The WYYY student engineer in his sulcus contemplates the moon, which looks sort of like a full moon that somebody bashed in a little bit with a hammer. Madame Psychosis asks rhetorically whether the circulars left anyone out. The engineer finishes his fizzy and makes ready to descend again for the hour's close, his skin turned toward the terrible cerebral chill of the Charles, which is windy and blue. Sometimes Madame Psychosis takes one random call to start 60 plus minus. Tonight, the one caller she ends by taking has a cultured stutter and invites MP and the YYY community to consider the fact that the moon, which of course, as any sot knows, revolves around the earth, does not itself revolve. Is it true? He says it is. That it just stays there, hidden and disclosed by our round shadows' rhythms, but never revolving. That it never turns its face away. The little Heath kid can't receive signals inside the cerebrum's subdural stairwells during descent, but the student engineer can anticipate she'll make no direct reply. Her sign off is more dead air. She almost reminds the engineer of certain types in high school, whom everyone adored because you sensed it made no difference to them whether you adored them. It had sure made a difference to the engineer, though, who hadn't been invited to even one graduation party with his inhaler and skin. The dessert Avril serves when hell's over is Mrs. Clark's infamous high protein gelatin squares, available in bright red or bright green, sort of like jello on steroids. Mario's wild for them. CT clears the table and loads the dishwasher since he didn't cook, and Hal gets into his coat at like 1:01 hours. Mario's still listening to the WYYY nightly sign off, which takes a while because they not only list the station kilowattage specs, but go through proofs for the formulae by which the specs are derived. CT always drops at least one plate out in the kitchen and then bellows. Avril always brings some hell gel O squares in to Mario and adopts a mock dry tone and tells Hal it's been reasonably nice to see him outside le bâtiment scientifique. The whole thing to Hal sometimes gets ritualistic and almost hallucinatory. The postprandial farewell routine, Hal stands under the big frame poster Metropolis and whoops his gloves together usually and tells Mario there's no reason for him to leave too. Hal's going to blast down the hill for a bit. Avril and Mario always smile, and Avril asks casually what his plans are. Hal always whoops his gloves together and smiles up at her and says, "Make trouble." And Avril always puts on a sort of mock stern expression and says, "Do not under any circumstances have fun," which Mario still always finds clutch your stomach funny every time, week after week. And at House Drug and Alcohol Recovery houses the 6 or 7 exterior units on the grounds of an Enfield Marine Public Health Hospital that, from the height of an ATH SCME 2100 industrial displacement fan, or Enfield Tennis Academy's hilltop, resembles even resembles 7 moons orbiting a dead planet. The hospital building itself, a VA facility of iron-colored brick and steep slate roofs, is closed and cordoned. Bright pine boards nailed across every possible access and aperture, with really stern government signs about trespassing. Enfield Marine was built during either World War II or Korea, when there were ample casualties and much convalescence. About the only people who use the Enfield Marine Complex in a VA related way now seem to be wild eyed old Vietnam veterans in fatigue jackets, de-sleeved to make vests, or else drastically old Korea vets who are now senile or terminally
alcoholic, or both. The hospital building itself, stripped of equipment and copper wire, defunct, Enfield Marines stay solvent by maintaining several smaller buildings on the complex's grounds, building the size of like prosperous homes, which used to house VA doctors and support staff, and leasing them to different state related health agencies and services. Each building has a unit number that increases with the unit's distance from the defunct hospital and with its proximity along a rutted cement roadlet that extends back from the hospital's parking lot to a steep ravine that overlooks a particularly unpleasant part of Brighton, Massachusetts Commonwealth Avenue and its green line tracks. Unit number 1, right by the lot in the hospital's afternoon shadow, is leased by some agency that seems to employ only guys who wear turtlenecks. The place counsels wild-eyed Vietnam vets for certain very delayed stress disorders and dispenses various pacifying medications. Unit number 2, right next door, is a methadone clinic overseen by the same MA Division of Substance Abuse Services that licenses Enid House. Customers for the services of Units 1 and 2 arrive around sunup and form long lines. The customers for Unit 1 tend to congregate in like minded groups of 3 or 4, gesture a lot, and look wild eyed and generally pissed off in some broad and geopolitical way. The customers for the methadone clinic tend to arrive looking even angrier, as a rule, and their early morning eyes tend to bulge and flutter like the eyes of the choked. But they do not congregate, rather stand or lean along number two's long walkway's railing, arms crossed, the lone brooding solo acts and standoffish 50 or 60 people all managing to form a line on the narrow walkway, waiting for the same small building to unlock its narrow front door, and yet still managing to appear alone and standoffish is a strange sight. And if Don Gately had ever once seen a ballet, he would, as an in house resident, from his sun up smoking station on the fire escape outside the 5-man bedroom upstairs, have seen the movements and postures necessary to maintain this isolation in union as balletic. The other big difference between units 1 and 2 is that the customers of 2 leave the building deeply changed, their eyes not only back in their heads, but peaceful, if a bit glazed. But anyway, in general, just way better put together than when they arrived, while number one's wild eyed patrons tend to exit number 1 looking even more stressed and historically aggrieved than when they came in. When Don Gately was in the very early part of his Enid House residency, he almost got discharged for teaming up with a bad news methadone addict from New Bedford and sneaking out after curfew across the EMPHH complex in the middle of the night to attach a sign on the narrow front door of Unit Two's methadone clinic. The sign said closed until further notice by order Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The first staffer at the methadone clinic doesn't get there to open up until 800 hours, and yet it's been mentioned how number two's customers always begin to show up with twisting hands and bulging eyes at like dawn to wait. And Gately and the speed freak from New Bedford had never seen anything like the psychic crises and near riot among these semi ex junkies. Pallid blade, slender chain smoking homosexuals, and bearded bruiser types in leather berets, women with mohawks and multiple sticks of gum in, upscale trust fund fritterers with shiny cars and computerized jewelry who'd arrived, as they've been doing like hypercondition rats for years, and many of them arrived at sunup with their eyes protruding and with Kleenexes at their noses and scratching their arms and standing on first one foot and then the other, doing basically everything but truly congregating. Wild, for chemical relief, ready to stand in the cold, exhaling steam for hours for that relief. Who'd arrived with the sun and now seemed to be informed that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was suddenly going to withdraw the prospect of that relief until, and this is what really seemed to drive them right over the edge out there in the lot, until further notice. Ape shit! Has rarely enjoyed so literal a detonation. At the sound of the first window pane breaking and the sight of a blown out old whore trying to hit a leather vested biker with an old a pre-metric grass grows by inches, but it dies by feet, sign from number two's clinic's pathetic front lawn, the methadone addict began laughing so hard that she dropped the binoculars from the Enid house upstairs fire escape where they were watching at like 630 hours, and the binoculars fell and hit the roof of one of the Enid house's counselor cars right below in a little roadlet with a ringing clunk just as he was pulling in. The counselor, his name was Calvin Thrust, and he was 4 years sober and a former NYC porn actor who'd gone through the house himself and now took absolutely zero in terms of shit from any of the residents, and his pride and joy was his customized vet, and the binoculars made rather a nasty dent. And plus, they were the house manager's amateur ornithology binoculars and had been borrowed out of the back office without explicit permission. And the long fallen impact didn't do them a bit of good, to say the least. And Gately and the methadone addict got pinched and put on full house restriction and were nearly kicked out. The addict from New Bedford picked up the animating needle a couple of weeks after that anyway and was discovered by a night staffer simultaneously playing air guitar and polishing the lids of all the donated canned goods in the house pantry way after lights out, stark naked and sheened with meth sweat, and after the formality of a urine, she was given the old administrative boot. Over a quarter of incoming in and out residents get discharged for dirty urine within their first days, and it's the shame all over Boston of halfway houses. And the girl ended up back in New Bedford, and then within like 3 hours of hitting the streets, and got picked up by the New Bedford's finest on an old default warrant and sent to Framingham Women's for a 1 to 2 bit, and got found one morning in her bunk with a kitchen rigged shiv protruding from her privates and another in her neck, and a thoroughly eliminated personal map. And Gately's individual counselor, Jean M., brought Gately the news and invited him to see the Methodist addict's demise as a clear case of the there but for the grace of God goeth Gately. Unit 3 across the roadlet from number 2 is unoccupied but getting reconditioned for lease. It's not boarded up, and the Enfield Marine maintenance guys go in there a couple days a week with tools and power cords and make a god awful racket. Pat Montesian hasn't yet been able to find out what sort of group misfortune number 3 will be devoted to servicing. Unit 4, more or less equidistant from both the hospital parking lot and the steep ravine, is a repository for Alzheimer patients with VA pensions. Number 4's residents wear jammies 24/7, the diapers underneath giving them a lumpy and toddlerish aspect. The patients are frequently visible at number 4's windows and in jammies, splayed and open mouthed, sometimes shrieking, sometimes just mutely open mouthed, splayed against the windows. They give everybody at Ennin House the holding phantoms. One ancient retired Air Force nurse does nothing but scream help for hours at a time from a second-story window. Since the Enid House residents are drilled in a Boston AAA recovery program that places great emphasis on asking for help, the retired shrieking Air Force nurse is the object of a certain grim amusement sometimes. Not 6 weeks ago, a huge stolen help wanted sign was found attached to number 4's siding right below the retired shrieking nurse's window. And number 4's director was less amused and demanded that Pat Montesian determine and push the Enid House residents responsible. And Pat had delegated the investigation to Don Gately, and though Gately had a pretty good idea who the perps were, he didn't have the heart to eternally press and kick answer and kick ass over something so much like what he'd done himself when new and cynical, and so the whole thing pretty much blew over. Unit number 5, kitty corner across the little street from Enid House, is for catatonics and various vegetable-ish fetal positioned mental patients subcontracted to a Commonwealth outreach agency by overcrowded LTIs. Unit number 5 is referred to for reasons Gately's never been able to pinpoint as the shed. It is understandably a pretty quiet place, but in nice weather when it's more portable, inmates are carried out and placed in the front lawn to take the air. Standing there propped up and staring, they present a tableau it took Gately some time to get used to. A couple newer residents get discharged lately in Gately's treatment for tossing firecrackers into the crowd of catatonics on the lawn to see if they could get them to jump around or display affect. On warm nights, one long-limbed, bespectacled lady who seems more autistic than catatonic tends to wander of the shed, wrapped in a bed sheet, and lay her hands on the thin, shiny bark of a silver maple in number five's lawn, stands there touching the tree until she's missed a bet check and retrieved. And since Gately graduated treatment and took the offer of a live-in staffer's job at Enid House, he sometimes wakes up in his staff cellar bedroom down by the payphone and tonic machine and looks out the sooty ground level window by his bed and watches the catatonic touching the tree in her sheet and glasses illuminated by Commonwealth Administration's neon, or the weird sodium light that spills down from the snooty tennis prep school overhead on its hill. He'll watch her standing there and feel an odd, chilled empathy he tries not to associate with watching his mother pass on some piece of living room chintz. Unit number 6, right up against a ravine on the end of the rutted road's east side, is Enid House Drug and Alcohol Recovery House. 3 stories of whitewashed New England brick, with the brick showing in patches through the whitewash, a mansard roof that sheds green shingles, a Scarborough's fire escape at each upper window, and a back door no resident is allowed to use, and a front office around on the south side with huge protruding bay windows that yield a view of ravine weeds and the unpleasant stretch of Commonwealth Avenue. The front office is the director's office, and its bay windows, the house's single attractive feature, are kept spotless by whatever residents get front office windows for their weekly chore. The mansard's lower slope encloses attics on both the male and female side of the house. The attics are accessed from trapdoors in the ceiling of the second floor and are filled to the beams with trash bags and trunks, the unclaimed possessions of residents who've up and vanished sometime during their term. The shrubbery all around Enid's house first story looks explosive, ballooning in certain unpruned parts, and there are candy wrappers and styrofoam cups trapped throughout the shrub's green levels, and gaudy homemade curtains billowed from the second story's female side's bedroom windows, which are open what seems like all year round. Unit 7 is on the west side of the street's end, sunk in hill shadow and teetering right on the edge of the eroding ravine that leads down to the avenue. Number 7 is in bad shape, boarded up and unmaintained and deeply slumped at the red roof's middle, as if shrugging its shoulders at some pointless indignity. For an Enid House resident, entering unit number 7, which can easily be entered through the detachable pine board over an old kitchen window, is cause for immediate administrative discharge, since unit number 7 is infamous for being the place where Enid House residents who want to secretly relapse with substances sneak in and absorb substances and apply Visine and chlorets and then try to get back across the street in time for 2330 curfew without getting pinged. Behind unit number 7 begins far and away the biggest hill in Enfield, Massachusetts. The hillside is fenced, off limits, densely wooded, and without sanctioned path. Because a legit route involves walking north all the way up the rutted road through the parking lot, past the hospital, down the steep curved driveway to Warren Street, and the way back south down Warren to Commonwealth, almost half of all Enid House residents negotiate number seven's back fence and climb the hillside each morning, shortcutting their way to minimum wage temp jobs at like the Provident Nursing Home or Schuylkill Mist Medical Pressure Systems, etc. Over the hill up Commonwealth, or custodial and kitchen jobs at the rich tennis school for blonde, gleaming tennis kids on what used to be the hilltop. Don Gately's been told that the school's maze of tennis courts lies now on what used to be the Hills hilltop before the academy's burly cigar chomping tennis court contractors shaved the curved top off and rolled the new top flat. The whole long, loud process sending all sorts of damaging avalanche type debris rolling down and all over Enfield Marines Unit 7, something over which you can sure bet the Enfield Marine VA administration litigated years back. But Gately doesn't know that ETA's balding of the hill is why number 7 can still stand empty and unrepaired. Enfield Tennis Academy still has to pay full rent every month on what it almost buried.